Hey everybody, Jake here, TrendSpider, to go over the weekend update into the second half of August. And as always, we'll start with the broad markets and then go into some individual names. Starting with the S&P 500 ETF SPY. If you watched the video last week, you'll remember that we were talking about this ascending wedge, aka a rising wedge, going into the apex of this setup. And we finally broke through it today on Friday. And you'll see here that a pretty strong, candle here, not necessarily closing at the low of the day, but definitely closing below the top 50% of this candle. So definitely not the strongest candle going into the weekend. And you can see here, if we're just using the gap snake here, we do have a gap below that would fill right around 412.75 or so. So if you are looking at downside potential moves, that gap would definitely be your first area to watch below. And as we talked about also last week, we're starting to hit a lot of resistance zones and rejecting off of them. And so you can see here on the SPY, you can see that we did move into this resistance zone earlier in the week. And then we did close near the week low. So all in all, not the strongest price action going into the week ahead. And we'll just have to see what happens from here. But all in all, technicals are saying that, we may be in for at least a little bit of a stall. I mean, if you look at the rally from July, you'll see here that we are up a ton. I mean, from middle of June, the exact lows were, we were up almost 20%. Near the top of near the high of this week. Now we're still up almost 17% from the June low. So not shocking that we take a little bit of a breather. Not saying this is long-term bearish or medium-term bearish until it proves itself otherwise. But for now, short-term, breaking down through this ascending wedge is not bullish. And remember, we do have that gap below. And remember to just use the gap detector, right? Just go to the indicators list, type in gap detector, and it will automatically show all the gaps above and below that are still open. So definitely a great tool to automate some of that process of manual analysis. Now going into the Qs, you'll see here that we did break down through this previous support zone, now acting as a potential resistance zone if we did move up going into next week. But all in all, we did very, very briefly break above this channel resistance here, and then, closed right into the resistance zone. So on the weekly chart, this could potentially be just an SR flip. SR flip meaning previous resistance acting as potential support here. But there's still a lot of price action to determine if that's the case or not. But for now, we are breaking down through this area here, highlighted, which I will turn to red, highlighted in red here. And same thing, turn on the gap detector. You'll see that we do have a gap below that would fill right around 319 or so below. So that would definitely be at least your first area to watch to the downside if this does gain some steam going into next week. Now, IWM is another one that does have some gaps below. It also has some gaps above. But I think the main area that we were watching going into the week from last weekend's video was this all-time high VWAP zone. So you can see here that we have once again rejected at this area. We talked about this being a potential rejection zone. And once again, this VWAP zone helped us because, we would have broken above that VWAP. So if I take off the percentage bands here and add no bands, we did technically break above this VWAP. So, some people may have thought of that's a trigger for a long trade, but we actually did not get through the zone. And the zone was simply a function of this previous price action back in January, where we did break above that all-time high VWAP, but didn't actually close above that zone, which is in this case, I think it's a 2% zone. So, once again, zones proving that they are important, and it's always good to give yourself a little bit of margin of error. Now, on the weekly chart, you can see here that we did have a pretty strong candle to the downside this week. Wouldn't entirely be shocking to see a potential SR flip, meaning the previous resistance turns into potential support. And that's a pretty far ways down, right? That's in the 180s, the low 180s if we do retest this resistance zone. So, IWM has been leading the way to the upside, and we'll see if it leads the way to the downside as well. But all in all, the fact that we did fail to break those all-time high VWAP zones, or that VWAP zone, is definitely something to consider going into the week ahead. And you do have that gap below. If we turn on the gap detector, that is down here. That fills right around 192.30 or so. Now let's go into Bitcoin, which was really just finally being the poster child of risk on, risk off once again in the broad markets this week. We've seen Bitcoin definitely move up from its lows, but all in all, it didn't really move with the markets, in general. So once again, it definitely going into this morning, the fact that Bitcoin was just absolutely tanking, and notice where it tanked through, right? We had a couple areas here. Let me turn on this chart here. But if you anchor the volume by price from the March high, you'll see here that we had this break-even demand zone. So this is just previous participants shown in this green area that we're back to break even. For a second there on Thursday, we did get a little bit of a stall, but notice what happened. We just moved straight down through this volume gap. So we had a volume gap above, but we also had a volume gap below, and we bounced, at least at this point, as of the afternoon on Friday, we kind of bounced right at this next break-even demand area. So these holders here from 20,000, 21,000 that were holding a decent profit, in the 23 to 25K area, are now back to even. And so, you may see a price kind of catch a little bit of a break here, not necessarily because buyers step in, but maybe just because supply is drying up. But all in all, the volume gap highlighted in orange here did exactly what you'd expect it to do. Price was able to drop very quickly through this area where there wasn't a lot of liquidity, and now we're moving right down to that next area of liquidity below, right around 21K. Now, this is where things get interesting. On the weekly chart, you'll see here that we are still holding this previous support zone, but if we really start to move down hard through the weekend, this area could break, and that could definitely be a big red flag for possibly the broad markets as well. I use Bitcoin as really your risk on, risk off proxy in the markets. And if this thing really starts to break down over the weekend, I can't see that being exactly an amazing thing for the equities broad markets going into the week ahead. We'll just see how this plays out going into the rest of the weekend. But when I do these videos on Friday, we still do have 2 days left of price action for the week on your cryptos. Now, going into some equity individual names, we'll start with old Apple. And Apple, as we talked about last week, right? There was a very important zone to watch, and that was this gap above highlighted in yellow. And you can see that we did fill it. And as always, as we talk about, these gaps can act as resistance zones. That's exactly what happened here. I mean, Apple's due for a big time pullback. I mean, look at this. We have multiple gaps to the downside. If you look here and we turn on the gap detector, we've got one that fills right around 166, give or take, 10 to 20 cents. Another one that fills down here right around 157.50, give or take 10 or 20 cents. So there are gaps below to keep an eye on, especially after just this straight up move. And we talked about this last week. I mean, look at the move that we had here. And this was nowhere near the move that we've had in the last 2 months. So, and look what happened after that. We had a huge move to the downside with new lows. Not sure if we're going to have that this time, but at least, some type of pullback would be healthy here for Apple. But the main thing is that gap did fill above, which gives us, possibly some room to move to the downside. Now, the second thing that we talked about on Apple last week in the weekend video was the fact that we were nearing this descending broadening wedge resistance zone. And notice that we did try to break above it intra-week, but we did actually close right at this area, right at this zone to end the week. So all in all, for now, possibly just an SR flip, but that's for price action to determine. Anything that you look at in the market should be conditional, right? There's no this is going to happen or this isn't going to happen. There's if this happens, then that happens. And that's how you should look at the markets, as essentially a conditional formula. So in this case, for now, possibly an SR flip with the price still in that resistance zone, possibly acting as support going into the week ahead. But we'll let price action, as I mentioned before, determine that. Now, going into Tesla, Tesla's one that has kind of this ascending triangle forming. Last week, we were talking about kind of this bull flag that was forming. You can see here, this was essentially the flag that we were looking at. Let me just kind of draw this like that, give or take. This was your bull flag. We broke out, had a strong continuation up on Monday, failed to get above these highs, and then we did pull back, and that price action almost created, or it did create, this ascending triangle. Now you can see that we pretty much closed right at this ascending triangle support zone. So going into next week, this is a crucial level to hold, and we'll see what happens, but definitely some gaps below to keep in mind. If you turn on the gap detector, you do have that gap below that would fill right around 750. So all in all, not exactly the strongest price action, but also, from last week, we still have a higher low. So if we look at the weekly candle here on the right, we still have this higher low from last week. So all in all, just kind of not much of a weekly candle here, just kind of doing its thing. But all in all, the fact that we did barely hold on to this ascending triangle previous support zone, I guess we could call it support again because it did close right at it. That is really going to, I think, make or break the market going into the week ahead, at least for Tesla. Now, looking at NVIDIA, kind of the same thing. We're right at the apex of the symmetrical triangle. Some people would definitely call this maybe a bear pennant, which at this point it is. And you can see here that we did close right near the support zone here, or previous support zone. We'll see if it acts as support going into next week. But notice we do have gaps above. We also have gaps below. And we'll just let price action determine which way it wants to break through the setup. And then generally, if price is breaking to the downside, it's likely going to continue to the downside. And then your gap here would be your potential magnet for price. If we break to the upside, then you do have gaps above as well. Now, on the weekly chart, if we did continue down going into, to end the month of August, this would kind of make for a decent inverse head and shoulders here. You've got your left shoulder, you've got your head. So if we do move down, let's say to the upper 150s to low 160s, your gap below here on the daily is right around, closes right around 158. So that would actually make a lot of sense if we did move down and fill that gap. Would still be an inverse head and shoulders, at least for the time being, until price action determines otherwise. But definitely keep an eye on potentially an inverse head and shoulders here forming on the weekly chart if we do get a strong week to the downside on NVIDIA going into the week ahead. Next one is XOM, which actually had a pretty strong week. Definitely a green week here. One thing I'll mention here on the daily chart is we're pretty much trading right at this symmetrical triangle resistance zone, literally closed right below this area. So all in all, you do have a gap above, which closes right around 100, give or take, 10 cents or so. And the fact that we did fail to actually close above this area is noteworthy. And we'll just have to see what price has in store for us next week. But definitely note the fact that we could not break above this descending diagonal resistance zone here. But then on the weekly chart, you'll see here a decent setup here. I mean, you're still above this longer term support zone, green for the week. And still holding all the levels that you need to keep the trend on the upside. But we'll see how that plays out next week. But, all in all, energy was one of the stronger performing sectors in the markets this week. Last one we'll look at is AMD. I think AMD caught a lot off guard. There was definitely a reason to potentially be bullish here. But as AMD likes to throw everybody off, especially as everybody gets into the same trade, which in this case definitely looked like the long side of things, just looking at Twitter. And you'll see here, we have the swing low VWAP. We have another zone here, another candle here that acts as kind of your next level to anchor VWAP from. So you can see here that if we do continue down, your VWAP is right around 93.50 or so. For me personally, at least, I was watching kind of for that 95.90 area to hold. We technically did hold above it, 95.95. But if we do continue to move down, your VWAPs are definitely going to be the areas to watch. So as I mentioned, right around 93.50. If we break down through that, your original swing low VWAP is right around $90, give or take, 10, 20 cents. Now on the weekly chart here, you'll see the same thing that we've talked about on some other names so far in this video. We're hitting this resistance zone. We saw it on the Qs. We saw it on SPY. And once again here, you can see that we failed to get above this resistance zone. That is going to be your main level to break above for really bulls to gain traction here. But for now, just a rejection that we've had a couple times over the last couple weeks. We just have not been able to get above this area. And we'll see if that changes going into next week. But all in all, not a great candle. You do have an inside bar here for the actual week of what is this? August 15th, the week of August 15th. We'll just have to see what happens going into next week. Some people may not like that I have to say that we'll see what happens, but if anyone's telling you they know what is going to happen, then you should probably run. So all this is conditional as always. Let's try to see if we can hold this handoff VWAP area right around 93.50, and we'll just go from there. But all in all, that is the update for this weekend, looking at some broad markets, looking at some individual names, and we'll see what the week has in store for us next week. Hopefully everybody has a great weekend. Thank you for watching, and remember, there is no certainty in the market. You need to look at every chart. If this happens, then that happens. If that happens, then this happens. And you're going to remove bias in your analysis if you do that. So remember, if you like these videos, please like and subscribe. Remember, we do have a 7-day free trial for TrendSpider if you want to give it a shot. And thank you, everybody, for listening in this weekend, and have a great weekend.